What if I told you that behind the proud flags, the shining skylines, and the patriotic songs of every U.S. state, there are shadows that few dare to mention, buried secrets that whisper of betrayal, blood, greed, and fear, stories that history books soften or skip entirely. But once you hear them, you can never unhear them. Picture the rolling hills of Virginia, where whispers of witchcraft trials predated Salem, or the oil-rich plains of Oklahoma, where rivers once ran red with the blood of innocents. Imagine the cobblestone streets of Boston, not just the birthplace of liberty, but of violent mobs who turned on their neighbors in frenzied suspicion. Every state in America has a story it would rather keep locked away. Stories of massacres and broken promises, of forgotten rebellions and haunting betrayals. They don't appear on postcards, and they don't echo through 4th of July parades. They're hidden in old courthouses, graveyards with no names, and burned letters left in attics. Tonight, we will step into those shadows. We will uncover the chilling truths that lie beneath the polished image of America's past. But be warned, this is not a gentle stroll through history. This is a descent into the secrets every state hoped you would never know. So, will you dare to keep listening? Or will the truths we unravel keep you awake long after the final word? The Puritans' curse, the dark trials of Massachusetts. What if freedom itself was born from fear? Massachusetts is celebrated as the cradle of liberty, but before the Revolution, before independence, it was a place haunted by paranoia. The Salem witch trials weren't just a tale of superstition. They were a brutal reminder of how fear can twist neighbors into enemies. It began in the late 1600s. Salem Village was a community already divided. Rich merchants versus struggling farmers. Old traditions clashing with new ambitions. And then whispers spread. Young girls claimed unseen hands scratched them, pinched them, tormented them. Who was guilty? Who was cursed? The answer could be anyone. Imagine the terror of waking at dawn to pounding fists on your door. A crowd outside. Your name shouted. You, accused of witchcraft. In court, spectral evidence. Dreams, visions, shadows, was enough to condemn. Neighbors you had shared bread with now swore you danced with the devil. 19 people were hanged. One man, Giles Corey, was crushed to death under heavy stones. His last words defiant, "More weight." Even in death, the Puritan fear demanded blood. But here lies the darker truth. These trials weren't only about witches. They were about control. A community tearing itself apart, using fear as a weapon. In their obsession with purity, they destroyed their own. The witch trials would echo long after the last gallows rope loosened. They became a warning etched into America's soul, that freedom and fear cannot live together. Yet, wasn't it the same Massachusetts that later cried for liberty from Britain? Was the revolution itself born in the ashes of Salem's gallows? The question lingers. Did America's fight for freedom carry the stain of its earliest fear? Next, we travel south, where an even bloodier secret waited to be buried under cotton fields and oak trees. The hidden massacre, Georgia's forgotten trail of blood. What if the land beneath your feet was stolen? Not once, but through fire and blood, until even the memory of its people was nearly erased. Georgia's plantations tell a story of wealth and progress, but hidden beneath the Spanish moss lies the silence of the Creek and Cherokee nations. In the early 1800s, Georgia was restless. Cotton was booming, and settlers hungered for land. But that land belonged to others. The Creek Nation had lived in those valleys for centuries. Yet treaties meant little against the tide of white expansion. Promises were broken as quickly as they were signed. Then came the whispers of gold. In the hills of northern Georgia, sparkling flecks were discovered in streams. By 1829, America's first major gold rush erupted. Not in California, but here. Thousands poured in, armed with picks, rifles, and greed. The Cherokee Nation stood in the way, and so began the removals. Picture families forced from their homes, soldiers marching them west in bitter cold. Elders fell, children wept. This was the start of the Trail of Tears. For Georgia, progress meant dispossession. For the Cherokee, it meant exile and death. But one massacre still hides in the shadows. In 1814, at Horseshoe Bend, U.S. forces led by Andrew Jackson slaughtered over 800 Creek warriors in a single day. The river choked with bodies. The survivors were stripped of their lands, their power, their very names. Georgia remembers its plantations, its generals, its gold rush. But beneath that pride lies a river of blood, a story that still stains the soil. And so, the question hangs heavy. Can a state's prosperity ever wash away the memory of the lives it erased? Our journey doesn't end here. For just west, another secret festered in silence. A night so violent that even the shadows refused to speak of it. Oklahoma's Black Wall Street, a city burned in silence. What if one of the most prosperous black communities in America was wiped off the map, and then almost erased from history itself? Oklahoma holds one of the darkest secrets of all. The story of Greenwood, known once as Black Wall Street. In the early 1900s, Tulsa's Greenwood district thrived. Black doctors, lawyers, shopkeepers, and entrepreneurs built a community of wealth and pride in a segregated America. Their businesses lined bustling streets. Jazz floated from clubs. Children played in clean parks. It was proof that black prosperity could flourish even against the odds. But in 1921, a spark of hatred ignited a firestorm. A young black man was accused of assaulting a white woman in an elevator. No proof, only whispers. The newspapers stoked rage. A white mob gathered, armed to the teeth. On the night of May 31st, the mob stormed Greenwood. They looted. They burned. They killed. Witnesses spoke of planes flying overhead, dropping firebombs. Entire blocks were reduced to ash. Families who had spent lifetimes building their dreams watched them turn to smoke. When the flames died, as many as 300 black residents lay dead. Over 1,200 homes destroyed. Tens of thousands left homeless. Survivors were herded into internment camps, held for days. And yet, perhaps the cruelest wound of all history tried to forget. For decades, textbooks skipped over it. Newspapers erased it. Survivors were silenced by fear. Only in recent years has America begun to acknowledge Tulsa's scar. Greenwood's ashes tell us that progress can be fragile, and that hatred, when unchallenged, devours everything. But here's the haunting question. If a thriving city can vanish overnight, how many other untold tragedies still lie buried beneath the maps of America? And as we move north, to a state built on industry and iron, another dark secret waits, hidden in the steel smoke of its past. The iron coffins, Pennsylvania's forgotten mine deaths. What if the wealth that built America's steel empire was forged not in pride, but in the suffocating screams of men trapped beneath the earth? Pennsylvania, celebrated for its iron and steel, hides a grim history buried in coal dust, one of greed, silence, and mass death. The 19th century was Pennsylvania's golden age of coal. Towns like Scranton and Wilkes-Barre flourished, their streets humming with the sound of factories and miners' boots. But prosperity came at a terrible cost. Coal miners descended deep into the earth each morning, armed with pickaxes and lamps. The air was heavy with dust, the tunnels damp and narrow. Explosions were common, collapses frequent. Every descent into the mines could be their last. Children as young as 8 worked as breaker boys, their small fingers plucking slate from rushing coal, their lungs blackened before they became men. One of the deadliest disasters struck in 1869, the Avondale mine tragedy. A fire broke out underground, devouring the oxygen. The miners had only one escape route, sealed shut by flames. 108 men and boys suffocated in the dark. Wives and mothers stood above the mine entrance, hearing their cries fade into silence. When the bodies were brought up, faces were frozen in terror, hands clawed as if scratching for air. Yet the coal barons continued. For every disaster, the mines reopened. Profits outweighed lives. Miners who dared protest were branded traitors or worse, accused of belonging to the secret Molly Maguires, a group said to avenge the miners through violence. The state responded with hangings and arrests. Justice was for the powerful, never for the men underground. Pennsylvania's cities grew rich, fueling America's rise. But the ghosts of miners, crushed, burned, suffocated, still linger in abandoned shafts. Their silence is a reminder. Prosperity is often paid for in blood. But what if the state's greatest tragedy wasn't buried beneath the earth, but sailed across the icy Atlantic waters? Our journey turns to a chilling story of steel and sorrow. The unsinkable lie, Titanic's ghost in New York. What if the proudest ship in history carried not just passengers, but a curse that would haunt New York forever? The Titanic is remembered as a tragedy of the sea, but its shadow falls most heavily on the port city that was supposed to welcome her. On April 10, 1912, the Titanic set sail from Southampton. A marvel of steel and luxury, she carried the rich and the poor alike, all dreaming of a future in America. Her destination? New York. Crowds awaited her arrival, ready to cheer the floating palace into harbor. But the cheers never came. Instead, on April 15th, the news arrived. Titanic had struck an iceberg. The unsinkable ship was gone. Over 1,500 souls swallowed by the freezing Atlantic. New York became a city of mourning. At Pier 54, families stood waiting for loved ones who would never come. When the Carpathia limped into harbor, carrying survivors, silence fell over the crowd. Women wept. Men collapsed in disbelief. But whispers soon spread. Was it truly an accident? Some claimed warnings of ice were ignored to set a speed record. Others whispered that lifeboats were too few because excess space meant fewer ticket sales. And darker still, conspiracy suggested the Titanic wasn't even Titanic, but her sister ship, Olympic, swapped in a fraud scheme gone fatally wrong. The truth may never be known. But in New York, the Titanic's shadow remained. Mass graves filled with unidentified bodies were dug. Survivors haunted the city, broken by memories of screams in the night, of lifeboats that rode away from the drowning. New York's skyline grew higher, its wealth greater, but every glittering skyscraper hid the echo of that night. For if the most advanced ship of her time could vanish in hours, what else, in this city of ambition, could crumble without warning? And so we move deeper inland, to the rivers of the Midwest, where America's heartland hides a horror of fire, ashes, and forgotten children. The River of Fire, Ohio's burning waters. What if the very river meant to give life to a city suddenly caught fire? Ohio is known for its steel, its factories, its hard-working cities. But it hides one of the most haunting images in American history. A river that burned like hell itself. The Cuyahoga River winds through Cleveland, once a symbol of prosperity. By the mid-20th century, industry flourished along its banks. But the prosperity was poisoned. Factories dumped oil, sludge, and chemicals into the water until the river became a thick, foul soup. Birds avoided it. Fish died in droves. Locals joked that if you fell in, you'd come out with scars. Then, in 1969, the unthinkable happened. A spark, no one knows from where, ignited the surface. Flames shot into the sky. Black smoke towered over Cleveland. The river burned. Imagine the horror of watching water, a symbol of purity and life, transform into a blazing inferno. It wasn't the first time. The Cuyahoga had caught fire at least a dozen times before. But this time the world noticed. Newspapers mocked it. Time magazine published a photo, declaring Cleveland the face of industrial neglect. The city's pride turned to shame. But here's the secret most forget. Those fires were not accidents. They were the natural result of greed, corporations pouring waste unchecked, politicians looking away, profits prioritized over people. For decades, Ohioans drank poisoned water, breathed poisoned air, while leaders pretended nothing was wrong. The burning river sparked something new, outrage. It fueled the birth of the Environmental Protection Agency, the Clean Water Act, and a national reckoning with pollution. Out of fire came reform, but the scars remain. And so we must ask, if America's rivers could burn, what else, hidden in plain sight, is ready to ignite? Next, we travel to the Deep South, where shadows of chains and blood still haunt the soil, and one state's darkest secret lingers in the fields beneath the sun. The Fields of Chains, Louisiana's Plantation Shadows, 700 words. What if the wealth of an entire state was written in chains, blood, and silence? Louisiana, celebrated for its jazz, cuisine, and Mardi Gras, hides fields that whisper of pain, plantations where the very soil remembers the footsteps of the enslaved. By the 18th and 19th centuries, Louisiana was a kingdom of sugar and cotton. Vast plantations stretched along the Mississippi, their owners growing unimaginably rich. But prosperity had a price. Enslaved Africans toiled from dawn to dusk under the blistering sun. Their sweat fed the cane fields. Their cries echoed through the swamps. At places like Whitney Plantation, history still lingers in the carved faces of children, memorials to those sold before they reached their teenage years. Enslaved people lived in wooden shacks, whipped for faltering, branded for fleeing, auctioned like cattle in New Orleans markets. The law protected the enslavers. The enslaved had no voice, no rights, only chains. But Louisiana's darkest secret wasn't just slavery. It was the violence hidden behind its charm. In 1811, the largest slave revolt in U.S. history erupted just outside New Orleans. Hundreds of enslaved men marched with makeshift weapons, chanting for freedom. Plantation houses burned in their wake. But the rebellion was crushed. Dozens were killed. Their heads were mounted on pikes along the river, a gruesome warning. Even after emancipation, the chains never fully broke. Convict leasing replaced slavery, black men arrested for petty crimes like vagrancy, then forced into backbreaking labor in sugar fields and prisons. Today, Louisiana's plantations are tourist attractions, but beneath the grand balconies and oak-lined paths lies a silence heavy with ghosts. Jazz and Creole cuisine may define Louisiana to the world, but the land itself remembers. And so we must ask, can beauty ever truly erase the echoes of horror? Or does every note of jazz still carry the faint cry of chains rattling in the night? But Louisiana is not alone. Across the river in the Midwest, another shadow rose, not of chains, but of blood on the city streets. The Summer of Blood, Illinois, and the Chicago race riot, 700 words. What if a single stone, thrown on a hot summer day, could ignite days of chaos, leaving a city dripping with blood? Chicago, home to skyscrapers, jazz, and industry, once burned not from fire alone, but from hatred that turned neighbor against neighbor. The year was 1919. America had just emerged from World War I. Black families, part of the Great Migration, had poured into Chicago, seeking jobs and freedom in the industrial North. But freedom was fragile. White workers feared competition. Politicians stirred division. Tension simmered, waiting for a spark. That spark came on July 27th. A young black teenager, Eugene Williams, drifted across an invisible segregation line while swimming in Lake Michigan. White men on the shore hurled rocks. One struck Eugene. He drowned before anyone could save him. Instead of arresting the attackers, police blamed the black swimmers. Anger exploded. For a week, Chicago descended into chaos. White mobs stormed black neighborhoods, torching homes and businesses. Black residents fought back with whatever weapons they had. Gunfire echoed through the streets. By the end, 38 people were dead. Over 500 injured. Thousands left homeless. The city tried to bury the story, but the truth seeped out. Newspapers framed it as riots, but to the victims, it was a massacre. A warning that even in the North, racial hatred ran deep. The aftermath shaped Chicago's future. Segregation hardened. Housing lines drew invisible walls that still haunt the city today. The riot was not a beginning, nor an end. Just another chapter in a story America refused to face. And so the question lingers. If a single stone could spark so much blood, how fragile is the line between order and chaos? From Chicago's burning streets, we move west, toward deserts where nuclear fire left a scar that glows in silence even today. The desert that glowed New Mexico's atomic shadow, 700 words. What if the most powerful weapon in human history was tested not in secrecy, but in the backyard of ordinary families, leaving them to breathe the ashes of apocalypse? New Mexico, with its deserts and mesas, hides the first ghost of the nuclear age. On July 16, 1945, at a place called Trinity Site, the desert turned to light. Scientists of the Manhattan Project, led by Oppenheimer, unleashed the first atomic bomb. In seconds, the night sky blazed brighter than 1,000 suns. The ground shook. A mushroom cloud rose higher than mountains. The world remembers Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But few remember the New Mexicans. Farmers, ranchers, children, who lived downwind of the blast. They were not warned. They were not evacuated. Ash fell like snow onto their fields and homes. Children played in it, thinking it was harmless. But it was radioactive fallout. In the years that followed, cancer rates soared. Families buried mothers, fathers, infants, victims of invisible poison. Livestock sickened. Water turned deadly. Yet the government stayed silent, denying responsibility, refusing compensation. Survivors called themselves the downwinders. For decades, they fought to be heard, to prove that their suffering was not coincidence but consequence. Many died waiting for recognition. Even Oppenheimer himself, in later years, admitted a haunting guilt. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. But the true destroyer was not just the bomb. It was the silence, the refusal to admit that America's own citizens had been sacrificed in the race for power. New Mexico's desert still holds Trinity Site, now a tourist attraction twice a year. Visitors stand where the ground once melted into glass. But beneath the fascination lies a chilling truth. The bomb did not only destroy cities abroad, it carved scars into American soil itself. And so we ask, if the desert itself could glow with the fire of annihilation, how safe can any nation be when its greatest weapon is also its deepest wound? From glowing deserts, our journey now moves to the Pacific coast, where the earth itself once turned against humanity, shaking a city to its knees. When the earth rebelled, California's great quake. What if, in a single minute, the ground beneath your feet could betray you, turning a thriving city into rubble, fire, and screams? California, often painted as the land of gold and sunshine, carries a scar so deep that even today, people whisper about the day the earth itself rose in fury. The year was 1906. San Francisco stood as the jewel of the West Coast. Its skyline dotted with grand hotels, bustling markets, and crowded streets alive with ambition. But on the morning of April 18th, at 5:12 a.m., everything changed. A violent tremor ripped across 296 miles of fault line. Buildings swayed. Streets split open. The sound was like thunder rolling beneath the earth. In less than a minute, the city's foundations buckled. Brick walls collapsed onto carriages. Gas lines ruptured, and within hours, firestorms consumed block after block. Survivors recalled the air thick with smoke and ash, the sky glowing red as if hell itself had broken loose. Families fled with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Soldiers were ordered to shoot looters on sight, their gunfire echoing through the burning city. By the time the flames died days later, over 80% of San Francisco was destroyed. Nearly 3,000 lives were lost, though some believe the number was far higher, covered up to protect the city's image and economy. But perhaps the darkest truth was not the quake itself, but what followed. Insurance companies refused to pay claims for earthquake damage, forcing desperate homeowners to torch what remained so they could claim fire insurance instead. Amid the ruins, greed thrived. The quake left more than rubble, it left paranoia. Californians knew the earth beneath them could never be trusted again. Even now, scientists warn that another big one is coming. The San Andreas Fault still groans in silence, biding its time. And so we ask, if an entire city can be reduced to ashes in minutes, what does it mean to build lives, dreams, and empires on such fragile ground? From Massachusetts to California, the story has come full circle. Every state, every corner of America, carries shadows stitched into its history. And now we face the final reckoning of what these shadows mean for us today. Conclusion. We began with whispers in Salem, where fear turned neighbors into enemies. We marched through blood-soaked fields in Georgia, through burning streets in Tulsa, through the poisoned rivers of Ohio, and the glowing deserts of New Mexico. We walked the halls of plantations, the alleys of Chicago, and the rubble of San Francisco. And at every turn, we discovered the same truth. Beneath the proud stories of progress lies a darker layer of history, a history of betrayal, greed, fear, and silence. These are not just tales of the past. They are warnings. They remind us that liberty can be poisoned by fear, prosperity can be built on blood, and progress can burn if unchecked. The ghosts of America's history are not buried. They walk beside us still, in the struggles for justice, equality, and truth that continue today. So the final question is not whether these secrets matter, they do. The question is, what will we do with them? Will we forget, allowing history to repeat itself? Or will we carry these shadows as lessons, refusing to let silence and denial shape our future?